5 minutes, and I want to be extremely clear at the outset. I don't doubt for a second the helpfulness of the information. I don't doubt for a second the importance of the information. What I'm trying to determine is whether or not it's important enough to send someone to jail who doesn't answer it. So let me ask you this, Mr. Biggs. Do you think it's important to register to vote?
Do I think it's important to, well, voting is voluntary. So
that's not my question. My question is it helpful and important to vote?
Sure.
In fact, one could argue that that is the ultimate national survey, right?
Correct.
If you want to take a mood on how people feel and what they're thinking, go check the election results. Now, what's the penalty for not registering?
In our country, nothing.
What's the penalty for not voting?
Nothing.
So you can understand how vexing it would be to some of us when the census was designed and calculated so you can apportion the different congressional seats. I mean, that's why we have a census. I don't think anyone's going to argue that the founders put that in the Constitution so we could have more demographic information for realtors. It's to apportion the congressional seats. So that's the reason we have a census, but yet we don't punish people for not registering to vote. We don't punish people for not voting, and no one's advocating that we do, but we do punish people who don't respond to portions of this form that have nothing to do with that right. So I want to walk through not the helpfulness of it. I don't doubt that. I'm not even doubting the importance of it. I want to ask about the constitutional grounding of being able to ask this. So, Director, I want to start with you and ask what level of scrutiny you think we should apply. I've heard the word compelling interest. I've heard important interest. Those are two different levels of constitutional scrutiny. So would you say that the government has a compelling interest in this information or just an interest in this information?
So if you go to the words in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, it clearly gives Congress the responsibility to direct how the census is done.
Agreed.
And so then in order to understand what the intent was, what I think past Congresses have done is to look at the first Census Act, and there it's absolutely clear, I think, by most historians read of that the intent was a full enumeration of the population in order that the reapportionment was equitably and fairly done, and the mandatory nature is specified from the get-go.
I don't want to cut you off. I've only got 2 minutes now, and I need to go through the form with you to ask you whether or not the governmental interest is important or compelling, because there's a different analysis. The courts that look at this will have a different analysis if you say it's compelling versus if you say it's important. The first several questions, I don't think anyone challenges. You have to know the age so you can apportion voting age population. You can't stuff a district with only people under the age of 18. So you have to know the age, you have to know the gender, and you have to know the race. I'm fine with compelling people to answer that. Whether or not someone is forgetful, do you agree with me that the First Amendment, while it protects your right to speak, also protects your right not to speak?
With all due respect, I'm not sure whether it matters whether I agree, but what the intent of Congresses has been over the decades, and Congresses have specified additional information, and then the courts have, in discussions not unlike this, asked the question, is it right that the government compel? And those cases seem clear that the intent of those Congresses was upheld by the courts.
I think those cases dealt with the Fourth Amendment and not the First Amendment, which is why I asked you specifically about the First Amendment.
All right,
those were privacy cases. Those weren't speech cases.
I am not an attorney.
I'm not much of one either, but my reading of them is those were Fourth Amendment and not First Amendment cases. So what, and I'm almost out of time. Perhaps we'll have a second panel. Again, I'm not, no one has to convince me it's helpful. Before all the realtors email me and call me from back home, nobody has to convince me it's important. Nobody has to convince me it's helpful. What you have to convince me of is that it is important and helpful enough to send a person to jail who wants to exercise their right not to answer it. So with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Illinois.